A quiet village, a God-fearing people, and then the children begin to scream. Salem, Massachusetts. What starts with 2 girls convulsing on a bedroom floor will end with 20 bodies swinging from the gallows. Neighbor turns against neighbor, friend condemns friend. A single accusation can mean death. The afflicted girls point their fingers, and the community believes them. They see the devil everywhere. In the beggar woman who mutters when turned away, in the woman who argued over property lines, in anyone who dares to be different. But was this really the work of Satan, or was it something far more human at play? Jealousy, greed, old grudges settling scores, the intoxicating power of being believed, the terror of being next. 20 innocent people will die, hundreds more will have their lives destroyed, and a community will learn too late the cost of mass hysteria. This is the story of the Salem Witch Trials, where fear became contagious, where justice became murder, where the real evil wasn't supernatural at all. It was us. Before you forget, please subscribe to our channel. To understand how Salem descended into madness, we need to understand what Salem was. And in 1692, Salem wasn't one place, it was 2, locked in a bitter rivalry that would help fuel the flames of witch hysteria. Salem town was the prosperous port on the coast. Merchants grew rich on trade. Ships came and went. Money flowed. It was cosmopolitan by Puritan standards, connected to the wider world of commerce, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, drifting from the strict religious doctrines that had founded the Massachusetts Bay Colony. But just a few miles inland lay Salem Village, now the town of Danvers. This was farming country. Hard soil, harder lives. The villagers scratched out their existence from the earth, and they resented the wealth and worldliness of Salem town. They wanted their own church, their own identity, their own independence. But they were still under Salem town's political control, still required to pay taxes there, still treated as subordinate. This wasn't just geography, it was a fault line running through the community's soul. The Putnam family dominated Salem Village. They were large landholders, powerful, deeply religious, and deeply resentful of Salem town's control. The Porters, on the other hand, had more ties to Salem town's mercantile interests. These 2 families had been feuding for decades, over land boundaries, over church matters, over political power. Their children didn't play together, their families didn't intermarry. Salem Village was already a community at war with itself. And then there was the question of the minister. In 1689, Salem Village hired Reverend Samuel Parris. It was a contentious decision from the start. Parris was a failed merchant turned minister, a man who had tasted worldly ambition and found it bitter. He demanded the deed to the parsonage and its land as part of his compensation. This was unusual, controversial. The Putnam faction supported him, the Porter faction opposed him. The village was divided before Parris even delivered his first sermon. Parris preached fire and brimstone. His sermons dripped with imagery of Satan's invisible attacks on God's chosen people. He spoke of enemies within and without, of hidden evil masquerading as righteousness. In Parris's worldview, Salem Village wasn't just a farming community. It was a battlefield in a cosmic war between God and the devil. And his congregation was losing. The late 1680s and early 1690s had been brutal for Massachusetts. King Philip's War had devastated the frontier, leaving refugees flooding into communities like Salem. There were constant fears of Native American attacks. The colony's charter had been revoked in 1684, throwing its legal status into chaos. A new charter wouldn't arrive until 1692, leaving everyone in political limbo. Who was in charge? What laws applied? It was a time of profound uncertainty. Smallpox epidemics swept through, harsh winters killed crops, people were dying, and the Puritan mind demanded an explanation. Nothing happened by chance.
Every misfortune was either God's punishment for sin or Satan's attack on the faithful. And if it was Satan, he needed human agents. He needed witches. The belief in witchcraft wasn't superstition to these people, it was theology. The Bible itself spoke of witches. "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," commanded Exodus. If you believed in God, you had to believe in the devil. And if you believed in the devil, you had to believe he recruited human servants. England had executed thousands of accused witches in the previous centuries. The famous witch-hunting manual, the Malleus Maleficarum, had been a bestseller. Cotton Mather, one of New England's most prominent ministers, had published Memorable Providences Relating to Witchcrafts and Possessions in 1689. This wasn't fringe belief. This was mainstream theology. Salem Village in January 1692 was a powder keg. Religious extremism, economic resentment, political instability, family feuds, frontier fears, all it needed was a spark. That spark came in the form of two little girls. January 1692, Reverend Parris's household. 9-year-old Betty Parris, the minister's daughter, began acting strangely. She would dive under furniture, she would contort her body into odd positions, she would scream, make choking sounds, speak gibberish. Her 11-year-old cousin, Abigail Williams, who lived with the Parris family, soon exhibited the same symptoms. Reverend Parris was terrified. He tried prayer, he tried fasting, he consulted with other ministers. Nothing worked. The girls only got worse. He called in Dr. William Griggs, the village physician. Griggs examined the girls and found no physical cause for their torments. He had one explanation. The evil hand is upon them. Witchcraft. Once that word was spoken, everything changed. The girls were questioned. Who was afflicting them? Who had sent their specter, their ghostly form, to torment them? Under pressure from desperate adults, the girls began to name names. The first 3 accused were chosen with precision, whether consciously or unconsciously. They were the most vulnerable people in Salem Village, people without protection, people already on the margins. Tituba was Reverend Parris's slave, possibly of Caribbean origin, possibly Native American, sources differ. She was foreign, enslaved, powerless. She had told the girls stories. Some accounts suggest she had taught them fortune-telling games. She was exotic, mysterious, and she had no one to defend her. Sarah Good was a homeless beggar who went door to door asking for food and shelter. She was poor, she smoked a pipe, she muttered under her breath when people turned her away. She was exactly the kind of person Puritans associated with witchcraft: poor, deviant, unsettling. Sarah Osborne was elderly and sickly. She had scandalized the community by living with a man before marrying him. She rarely attended church. She was involved in a dispute over her late husband's well. She had enemies. These 3 women couldn't fight back. They had no powerful families to defend them. They were the perfect first targets.
On February 29, 1692, warrants were issued for their arrest. On March 1st, they were brought before magistrates John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin in the Salem Village Meeting House for preliminary examination. The meeting house was packed. Everyone wanted to see the witches. Hathorne's questioning was aggressive, assuming guilt from the start. Sarah Good, what evil spirit have you familiarity with? Not whether she had familiarity with evil spirits, but what kind. The interrogation presumed guilt. Sarah Good denied everything. She was a beggar, she said, nothing more. But when Betty and Abigail were brought in, they immediately began shrieking and convulsing in her presence. They claimed her specter was torturing them right there in the courtroom, invisible to everyone else, but terrifyingly real to them. This was spectral evidence, testimony about visions, dreams, and invisible torments that only the afflicted could perceive. It would become the cornerstone of the Salem trials, and its acceptance would doom dozens.
Sarah Osborne also denied the charges. She suggested that perhaps the devil was impersonating her, using her form without her knowledge or consent. This was actually a theologically sound argument. Many Puritan scholars believed the devil could take anyone's shape. But in the fevered atmosphere of Salem, suggesting that the devil might be deceiving the accusers sounded like protecting witches. Then came Tituba, and Tituba confessed. Whether tortured by Paris beforehand, terrified into cooperation, or hoping confession would save her life, Tituba gave them exactly what they wanted. She spoke of a tall man from Boston, dressed in black, who made her sign his book in blood. She described a conspiracy of witches. She wasn't alone, she said. There were others, many others. She spoke of familiars, animal servants of the devil, a yellow bird, a hairy imp, rats, cats, a tall man with white hair. She wove a tale that confirmed every fear the Puritan community held. The devil wasn't just present in Salem, he was organizing, building an army. And Tituba's testimony suggested that the 3 women already accused were just the beginning. The panic spread like fire. More girls began showing symptoms. Ann Putnam Jr., 12 years old, daughter of one of Salem Village's most powerful families. Her mother, Ann Putnam Sr., also claimed to be afflicted. Elizabeth Hubbard, Mary Walcott, Mercy Lewis, Elizabeth Booth, Susanna Sheldon. The circle of the afflicted grew, and with each new afflicted girl came new accusations. By March 1692, the accusations expanded beyond the margins of society. Martha Corey was accused, a respectable church member. Rebecca Nurse, elderly, pious, beloved by many in the community. These weren't outcasts. These were church-going, established members of Salem. The message was clear. Witchcraft was everywhere. No one was above suspicion. The devil's conspiracy ran deep. What was happening to these girls? The theories range from the psychological to the physiological. Some historians suggest ergot poisoning, a fungus that grows on rye and can cause convulsions, hallucinations, and the sensation of crawling skin. But ergot poisoning doesn't explain why only certain people were affected, or why the symptoms started and stopped so conveniently during examinations. Others point to mass hysteria, a well-documented phenomenon where psychogenic symptoms spread through a group, particularly among adolescents in high-stress environments. The girls may have started with genuine distress that morphed into performance as they received attention and power. Some scholars suggest deliberate fraud, that the girls, especially the older accusers, recognized the power they suddenly wielded and used it. In Puritan society, young girls had no authority. They were expected to be silent, obedient, invisible. But as afflicted accusers, they commanded the attention of ministers, magistrates, and entire communities. Adults hung on every word. They could destroy people with a gesture. The truth likely combines all these elements. Some girls may have experienced genuine psychological distress that was interpreted through the lens of witchcraft belief. Others may have learned that exhibiting symptoms brought attention and power. Still others may have been consciously manipulating the situation for revenge or entertainment. But whatever the cause, the result was the same. Salem Village believed them, and people would die because of it. By May 1692, the jails were overflowing. Not just in Salem, but in Boston and Ipswich, too. Men, women, and children crowded into colonial prisons that were little more than dungeons. They were chained. They were given minimal food. Some died before they could even be tried. Families were charged for their imprisoned relatives' upkeep, jail fees that many couldn't afford. The colonial government finally acted. Governor William Phips, newly arrived in Massachusetts with the colony's new charter, established a special court of oyer and terminer to hear and determine. specifically to try the witchcraft cases. He appointed Lieutenant Governor William Stoughton as Chief Justice. This would prove to be a fatal decision. Stoughton was a hardliner, a fierce Puritan who believed in the reality of Satan's attacks on New England. He accepted spectral evidence without question. Under his leadership, the court became a machine designed to convert accusations into executions. The first to be tried was Bridget Bishop on June 2nd, 1692. Bridget was an easy target. She had been accused of witchcraft years before and acquitted. She ran a tavern, wore flashy red clothing, and was rumored to have multiple marriages. She didn't conform to Puritan expectations of female behavior. When the afflicted girls convulsed in her presence, and when spectral evidence was admitted, her fate was sealed. She was found guilty. On June 10, 1692, Bridget Bishop was taken to Gallows Hill and hanged. She was the first to die. She would not be the last. The trial revealed the twisted logic that would doom so many. The court accepted spectral evidence, the afflicted claimed to see the accused specter tormenting them, and this invisible, unprovable testimony was treated as fact. The court accepted the touch test. If an afflicted person was touched by the accused and their symptoms stopped, this was proof of witchcraft. The accused were asked impossible questions. Are you a witch? A denial was evidence of deceit. A confession was evidence of guilt. Some of the accused confessed, not because they were guilty, but because confession offered a path to survival. Those who confessed were not executed. They were too valuable as witnesses against others. Those who maintained their innocence were hanged. Think about that perverse incentive. Tell the truth and die. Lie and live. Not everyone could bring themselves to lie, even to save their lives. Rebecca Nurse was 71 years old, hard of hearing, and deeply respected. When she was accused, 39 neighbors signed a petition attesting to her good character. During her trial, even the jury initially found her not guilty. But Judge Stoughton wasn't satisfied. He pressured the jury to reconsider. He questioned their verdict. Under his influence, they changed their verdict to guilty.
Rebecca Nurse was hanged on July 19th, along with Sarah Good, Elizabeth Howe, Susanna Martin, and Sarah Wilds. As Sarah Good stood on the gallows, Reverend Nicholas Noyce urged her to confess. She refused. "I am no more a witch than you are a wizard, and if you take away my life, God will give you blood to drink." 5 women died that day. The nooses tightened, the bodies swung, and Salem's most prominent ministers watched, certain they were doing God's work. August brought more trials, more executions. John Proctor and his wife Elizabeth were accused, the same Ann Putnam Jr. who claimed their specters tormented her. John Proctor tried to expose the fraud. He wrote letters claiming the girls were lying. He suggested they be moved out of Salem and questioned separately. He was ignored. John Proctor was hanged on August 19th, along with John Willard, George Burroughs, George Jacobs Sr., and Martha Carrier. George Burroughs was a former minister of Salem Village. He had left after disputes with the Putnam family over his salary. Now the Putnams helped condemn him. At the gallows, George Burroughs recited the Lord's Prayer perfectly, something witches supposedly couldn't do. The crowd was moved. Some began to doubt. But Cotton Mather, watching from horseback, reminded them that the devil could appear as an angel of light. The execution proceeded. Martha Carrier was called the Queen of Hell by Cotton Mather. Her crime? She was argumentative, independent, and had infected several family members with smallpox. When her young sons were tortured, yes, tortured, to extract confessions, they implicated their mother to make the pain stop. September brought the most horrifying execution of all. Giles Corey was 80 years old. When he was accused, he refused to enter a plea. He wouldn't say guilty or innocent. Without a plea, there could be no trial. But there was a way to compel a plea, peine forte et dure, pressing. Giles Corey was stripped naked, laid on the ground, and heavy stones were placed on his chest, one by one, increasing the weight slowly. The goal was to make him plead so he could be tried. But Giles Corey refused. For 2 days, as the stones crushed his chest, he said only 2 words: "More weight." On September 19, 1692, Giles Corey was crushed to death. He never entered a plea. In doing so, he prevented the court from trying him, which meant his property couldn't be confiscated, as witch property usually was. His sons-in-law inherited his estate. Giles Corey died, protecting his family's future. His wife, Martha, had been hanged the day before, along with 7 others: Mary Asty, Alice Parker, Mary Parker, Anne Pudiator, Wilmot Redd, Margaret Scott, and Samuel Wardwell. 8 people executed in one day, September 22, 1692, the deadliest day of the Salem Witch Trials. 20 people were now dead, 14 women and 6 men, 19 hanged, 1 pressed to death. At least 5 more died in prison, including Sarah Osborne and Sarah Good's infant daughter. But the accusations didn't stop. More than 150 people remained in prison awaiting trial. The afflicted girls continued pointing fingers. The list of accused now included wealthy merchants, ministers' wives, even the governor's own wife, Lady Phipps. That last accusation would change everything. When Lady Mary Phipps, the governor's wife, was cried out upon as a witch, Governor William Phipps finally paid attention. Throughout the summer of 1692, Phipps had been largely absent, dealing with military matters on the frontier. He had left the trials in Stoughton's hands, trusting the lieutenant governor to handle the situation. But as the accusations spread like a plague, consuming not just poor beggars but respectable members of society, doubts began to surface. Increase Mather, Cotton Mather's father and one of the colony's most influential ministers, began to question the proceedings. On October 3, 1692, he delivered a sermon to Cambridge ministers that would be published as Cases of Conscience Concerning Evil Spirits. His key argument: it were better that 10 suspected witches escape than that one innocent person be condemned. More critically, he questioned spectral evidence. The devil may appear in the shape of an innocent person. If the devil could impersonate anyone, then seeing someone's specter tormenting you didn't prove that person was a witch. It might prove nothing except that the devil was a liar. This argument struck at the heart of the trials. Nearly every conviction had heavily relied on spectral evidence. If spectral evidence was unreliable, then the entire legal foundation collapsed. Other ministers joined the criticism. The accused were now including people that even the most paranoid couldn't believe were witches. The net had spread too wide. The accusations were becoming absurd. Thomas Brattle, a wealthy Boston merchant, wrote a scathing letter in October 1692 mocking the trial procedures. He pointed out the logical contradictions. He questioned why confessors who accused others were believed, while those who maintained innocence were executed. He noted that the afflicted girls seemed to have an awful lot of control over their symptoms, convulsing on cue during trials, but seeming fine at other times. Brattle's letter circulated among Boston's elite. The tide of public opinion was turning. On October 29, 1692, Governor Phipps dissolved the court of Oyer and Terminer. No more trials under Stoughton's leadership. The special court was disbanded. But 150 people still sat in prison.
Some had been there for months. Something had to be done. In January 1693, a new court was established, the Superior Court of Judicature. Same judges, including Stoughton, but different rules. The new court was explicitly instructed not to admit spectral evidence. Without spectral evidence, convictions became nearly impossible. Of the 56 people tried in the new court, only 3 were convicted, and Governor Phipps promptly pardoned them. By May 1693, Phipps issued a general pardon for all remaining accused witches and ordered the prisoners released. There was just one problem: jail fees. Prisoners or their families had to pay for their time in jail before they could be released. Food, chains, transportation, all of it came with a bill. Many families had been financially ruined by the accusations. They couldn't pay. Some accused witches remained in prison for months after the trials ended, not because they were guilty, but because they were poor. Eventually, through charity and negotiation, most were released. But the damage was done. Families were destroyed. Reputations were ruined. 20 people were dead. 5 more had died in prison. And an entire community had learned what happens when fear overrides reason. In the aftermath, Salem tried to make sense of what had happened. Some of the accusers never recanted. The Putnam family, whose daughter Anne Jr. had been one of the primary accusers, maintained for years that the devil had deceived them into seeing false specters. They framed themselves as victims of Satan's deception rather than perpetrators of murder. But in 1706, 14 years after the trials, Anne Putnam Jr. did something remarkable. She stood before the Salem village congregation while a written statement was read on her behalf.
I desire to be humbled before God for that sad and humbling providence that befell my father's family in the year about 92. I, then being in my childhood, should by such a providence of God be made an instrument for the accusing of several persons of a grievous crime, whereby their lives were taken away from them. I desire to lie in the dust and to be humbled for it, and earnestly beg forgiveness of God and from all those unto whom I have given just cause of sorrow and offense. She was the only one of the primary accusers to publicly apologize. In 1697, the Massachusetts General Court ordered a day of fasting and prayer for the tragedy. Samuel Sewell, one of the judges, stood in Old South Church in Boston while a statement of his guilt was read aloud. He publicly accepted the blame and shame of it, asking God and the community for forgiveness. 12 jurors signed a statement acknowledging that they had been terribly mistaken. We confess that we ourselves were not capable to understand. We justly fear that we were sadly deluded and mistaken. But not everyone repented. William Stockton, the chief judge who had pushed so relentlessly for convictions, never apologized. He never expressed doubt. He went on to serve as lieutenant governor and acting governor until his death in 1701. To the end, he maintained he had done right. In 1702, the General Court declared the trials unlawful. In 1111, the colony passed legislation restoring the rights and good names of those accused and providing financial restitution to their heirs, £22, 12 shillings each, on average. A pittance for a life. But legal exoneration came too late for most. The survivors bore scars, psychological, financial, social, for the rest of their lives. What really caused the Salem Witch Trials? There's no single answer. It was a perfect storm of factors. Religious extremism created a worldview where witches were not only real, but present and dangerous. Every misfortune demanded a supernatural explanation. Social tensions, the rift between Salem Village and Salem Town, the feuding Putnam and Porter families, meant that there were existing grudges ready to be weaponized. Notice how many of the accused had property disputes, family conflicts, or social connections with the accuser's enemies. Political instability left the colony without clear legal authority or protection. The old charter was revoked. The new charter hadn't solidified. Who was in charge? What laws applied? It was legal chaos. Economic stress and trauma from frontier warfare created widespread anxiety. People were dying from disease, starvation, and Native American raids. They needed someone to blame. And then there were the girls themselves. Whether suffering from genuine psychological distress, caught up in mass hysteria, or deliberately manipulating the system, they discovered they had power. For adolescent girls, in a society that demanded their silence, that power must have been intoxicating. The trials show us what happens when institutions abandon due process, when evidence standards collapse, when accusations become proof, when fear becomes policy. The irony is that everyone involved claimed to be fighting evil. The ministers believed they were protecting God's people from Satan. The magistrates believed they were enforcing justice. The accusers believed they were exposing hidden wickedness. But the only evil in Salem was human. The cruelty of neighbors, the cowardice of leaders, the readiness to believe the worst about each other, the willingness to kill rather than question. Epilogue. The legacy. Music lifts slightly, cautious, thoughtful. The term witch hunt has become shorthand for false accusations driven by hysteria. McCarthyism in the 1950s was explicitly compared to Salem. Arthur Miller wrote The Crucible in 1953 as an allegory for the House Un-American Activities Committee's persecution of suspected communists. But Salem isn't just history, it's a warning that repeats. The Salem trials teach us about the dangers of spectral evidence, believing accusations based on claims that can't be verified or challenged. How different is that from modern allegations where mere accusation is treated as proof? They teach us about moral panic, the belief that a secret conspiracy of evildoers is working to destroy society, requiring extreme measures to combat. Every era has its witch hunts. The enemy changes, the dynamic doesn't. They teach us about the fragility of justice. The same magistrates who sent Rebecca Nurse to the gallows despite a not guilty verdict were the same men who had presided over other courts. They weren't monsters. They were ordinary officials who abandoned principles when fear took hold. They teach us about scapegoating. When societies face stress, economic, political, cultural, they look for someone to blame. Salem blamed witches. Other societies have blamed immigrants, ethnic minorities, religious groups, political dissidents. The target changes, the mechanism is the same. And perhaps most importantly, Salem teaches us that good intentions don't prevent evil outcomes. Everyone involved thought they were doing right. The ministers thought they were saving souls. The magistrates thought they were protecting society. The accusers thought they were exposing hidden wickedness. But intentions don't matter when people are hanging from trees. Today, Salem Village is Danvers, Massachusetts. Salem Town is just Salem. The sites of the trials have been marked and memorialized. In 1992, on the 300th anniversary, a memorial was dedicated to the victims, 20 stone benches carved with the names of the executed and the dates they died. Giles Corey, Rebecca Nurse, John Proctor, Sarah Good, and 15 others whose names should never be forgotten. The memorial's inscription reads, "In memory of those innocents who died during the Salem Village witchcraft hysteria of 1692. Walk through Salem today and you'll find witch museums, witch shops, witch tours. The city has commercialized its dark past, turned tragedy into tourism. Every October, thousands of visitors descend on Salem for Halloween festivities. There's something unsettling about that.
These weren't fictional characters. They were real people who died in terror and pain because their neighbors turned on them. But perhaps the commercialization carries its own lesson. We're comfortable with the Salem Witch Trials because they're safely in the past. We can tour the sites, buy the souvenirs, and congratulate ourselves that we would never do such a thing. But would we? When fear takes hold, when authorities demand conformity, when accusations spread like wildfire, when institutions abandon due process, what would we do? History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, and the melody of Salem still echoes today. In times of crisis, in moments of fear, when the crowd is baying for blood and the authorities are demanding names, will we be the ones with the courage to say, "I don't know what you're talking about"? Or will we point our fingers, name our neighbors, and tell the crowd what it wants to hear? 20 people died in Salem because not enough people were brave enough to say no, because the systems designed to protect the innocent failed, because fear became more powerful than truth. The real question Salem asks us isn't, how could they have been so barbaric? It's, what would we do? And that question remains unanswered.